Hello everyone, how are you? I'm Ari Theriger and today I'm going to continue speaking about animism, but this time a shorter and quicker video just to speak a little bit about the trickster spirits. Of course, not delving too much on the subject and talking about the many trickster spirits of each culture and mythology, but a general perspective on the identity and functions of trickster spirits in an animistic worldview, as these types of entities are unfortunately often understood to be sort of foolish or even jesters, precisely because a deeper understanding from the animistic point of view isn't properly given and addressed. In animism, trickster spirits are indeed seen as very, very important entities, as both creators and destroyers. So they continuously have several roles and functions in the cycle of life and existence, and are key entities that are responsible for the evolution and continuation of life, linking things together, sort of binders. In many mythologies, we see at least one trickster character, which is often either taken as a fool or its importance is discarded due to the fact that in the contemporary religious mind, a lot more emphasis and importance is given to deities, to the gods. However, trickster characters in mythologies appear as often as the gods, and sometimes even more than the gods themselves, which is also why I'm making this video, to attach the information in it to the previous video I have done about Loki of the Norse mythology, where I have stated that Loki isn't a god and never was understood to be a god in the Scandinavian pre-Christian past, of course, but indeed a trickster spirit. This doesn't take away its importance, on the contrary. In this video, you will understand that trickster spirits in animism, just like Loki in Norse mythology and other trickster characters of other mythologies, are always present in every event, or at least most events, and accounts about them appear as often or more than the accounts of deities. Trickster spirits are present since the beginning and in the end, and in the renewal of life once again. Trickster spirits are present in creation, but also destruction. They are responsible for evolution and the continuation of evolution and life. So, by understanding the importance of trickster spirits or entities in animism, we understand the trickster characters in mythologies and folklore and folk tales, which are the surviving accounts of earlier trickster spirits within animistic worldviews. And as such, we understand why they appear so often and often enrolled with each character and deities, and always the ones making it possible for life to continue and evolution to carry on. So this is important to take in mind, because trickster characters only remain present in most mythologies due to the fact that they were highly important for the common folk, the common people. Mythologies often demonstrate the religions and belief systems of the elite, of the nobility, but precisely because the people from outside the elite panorama have their own belief systems, and in pagan times, such belief systems a lot more animistic in nature, several folk tales are created and weight quite a lot on the religious and spiritual lives of the common people. So when the religions of the elite or of the state or the nobility are eventually expressed to the common people, such religions will not survive if they do not also incorporate the belief systems of the common folk, and of course their folk tales and traditional folk beliefs. Which is why trickster spirits survive in mythologies and appear as often or more than the gods themselves. Not because they were seen or understood as gods or even venerated or addressed by the elite, but because of their tremendous importance in the belief systems of the common people, which had to be added to the religions of the elite to facilitate the spreading and acceptance of the religions of the elite, a small fraction of the society. So, with no more delay, let's get started, please. As I have explained on the previous video concerning the ancestors, for a better understanding, I have expressed on that video that the ancestors fall into the category of more than human persons, which are the entities that are not seen as human, but also whose power is beyond that of human persons. And at the same time, these are entities preoccupied with the activities of human persons and care and want to participate and interact with human persons for the reasons I have expressed on that previous video, right? This to say that in this category of more than human persons, aside from the ancestors, there's also the gods and the trickster entities. Trickster entities whose functions can easily lead us to the mistake of seeing them as deities, because such trickster spirits are tremendously powerful and are also creators and are also quite frequently mentioned and addressed in folk traditions, in folk tales and mythologies, and in the practical activities that allow human persons to contact with such entities or spirits and invite them to take part in specific ceremonies, rituals, and of course other activities of a magical religious character, or simply to aid in the daily affairs of the living human community. While a deity is seen as an entity with a particular function and, let's say, a field of expertise, a particular field of expertise, which ends up being an entity that gives but also takes on that field, the trickster spirits or entities and other beings have a broader panorama of activities and functions, not specifically linked to a singular function or a particular activity, but instead these are entities who extend their powers over a variety of important factors that contribute to the continuation of all life. The importance of trickster spirits in animism makes us realize that many animistic cultures have actually no need to have a specific deity or deities as the creators of something, be that of the world or just parts of it. This doesn't mean that there isn't the belief in deities in animism. Of course there is. It just means that some animistic peoples may have the need to have creator deities to explain why the sky is the way it is, why the earth is the way it is, but many other animistic peoples, cultures, communities simply have no need to express why things are the way they are, because they just are, and that's it. And this is when trickster spirits enter, because even though they have multiple functions and can also act as creators and destroyers, most of their functions fall into the maintenance of life, meaning in many animistic cultures, there isn't particularly the need to explain who created what, but there is the necessity to maintain what already exists, what already is, precisely to propitiate the continuation of life and, if necessary, destroy or rearrange what already exists, transform it and adapt it to a new reality, evolution, to continue the cycle of life and existence. So for those who are more inclined to the Old Norse spirituality, you understand why Loki is always the one being called upon by the gods themselves to put things right back the way they were, even though most of the time it's actually Loki that causes the change and is the one to fix what he has done, and things are never the same again. There is evolution, there is change, but there is also the continuation of life, because Loki creates, destroys, adapts, changes, and remakes, and life goes on. I'm picking Loki just as an example, as this channel is mostly about Scandinavian studies, and to link to the previous video I've mentioned on Loki as a trickster spirit. Now, it's also particularly important to understand that in animism, a trickster spirit isn't seen as good or bad, as an all benevolent or all malevolent entity. The trickster in animism is both feared and revered because the functions and powers of the trickster entities are necessary. So they can be both invited, but can also be avoided. Even though they are also creators, there's actually no need for the animistic community to celebrate or even welcome the presence of these trickster entities. And again, this is why in contemporary times it has been so hard to understand trickster characters in mythologies and folk tales, especially within the Western cultural world, due to the striking dualistic views of religions and philosophical religious thinking of the Western world. A collective consciousness was created in our societies where we can immediately identify what is wrong or what is right without giving a second thought if things are indeed right or wrong. Right or wrongness depends very much on the perspective, and what might be considered to be wrong and evil to some might actually be a necessity in the world so life may thrive and continue. So, in the Western cultural world, due to the dualistic worldview of good and bad, it has been hard to understand the function and the essence of trickster characters because they can be both portrayed as seemingly good and seemingly bad. But the truth is, they are neither. Trickster spirits represent the very cycle of nature and life. There is no choice, you see, not picking a side, but simply creating the conditions for life to carry on, for the cycle to carry on. Which is why in animism, tricksters are both portrayed as seemingly good and seemingly bad, which is why they are invited and celebrated at times, but also not celebrated and definitely not invited. They can cause a particular sickness, for instance, that kills many living beings in order to create a much needed balance. Or they can create strong winds that destroy crops and forests and even mountains and many lives, of course, but it is a much needed process of renewal to propitiate new life, new cycles, new possibilities, a catastrophic event in order to propitiate rebirth. The trickster entities are not good or evil, they are amoral, absolutely unconcerned with what might be understood or considered as rightness or wrongness. The functions and powers of trickster spirits are simply to ensure the continuation of life and the cycle of existence, forcing creation and forcing destruction, forcing change and evolution without moral, ethics, or any conception of values. In other words, entities of, let's say for now, maintenance. The expressions of trickster spirits are profoundly communicated and given voice to in animistic cosmologies and also, especially, in cosmogonies. Generally speaking, globally speaking, in many indigenous societies, the world itself is understood to have not solely originated by the careful and thoughtful labor of deities, but also having been created by the ambiguous encounter between order and chaos, meaning by the activity of trickster entities, which are not good or bad, but both order and chaos. Precisely why we seldom find good and evil expressed in mythologies, but rather notions of order and chaos. Not particularly benign or malignant, but simply polarities capable of convergence, and through this encounter will create something out of it, neither for good nor evil, but just to maintain existence going. This is the reason why trickster spirits in animistic societies are not seen as deities, because they are not particularly venerated or even welcomed or invited, at least not all the time, because their powers are not for specific intentions or particular factors, but instead their powers are for the maintenance of what already is, but also for the necessary evolution. So what is can continue to be. So trickster spirits are often dangerous, antisocial, amoral. That's their nature due to their whole purpose, function, and power. So they often harm themselves and others in their attempt to maintain things going and evolving. But that's not necessarily evil, of course, because due to their entire purpose of existence, they make the world as it is, and continue to maintain it. Trickster entities are the closest thing the Western society might understood as nature, not as an abstract conception, but as a living entity that doesn't make distinctions and continues to take actions in order to continue to exist. But in animistic societies, this nature is somewhat understood as actual entities, tricksters, who are the ambiguous encounter of order and chaos that makes it possible for the world to be and continue to be. Tricksters are the entities that constantly test and transgress the boundaries that orderly deities attempt to establish, creating a sort of caricature right now, just for a better understanding. Let's imagine that a specific deity creates a mountain and the forests below and the rivers, thus creating an orderly environment. The trickster entity or entities will test this environment, will try to transgress the boundaries of this structured reality, not just to make sure that everything seems to be in order and let's maintain this as it is, but perhaps most importantly, instead, such trickster entities make new spaces available in which other possibilities might occur. In other words, deities might create something with intention for specific realities, possibilities, and beings to exist, but the trickster spirits or entities will, on the other hand, will create new possibilities neither intended or even imagined by the deities, but also neither by the tricksters themselves. In this way, in animistic societies, it's not the gods that create evolution and different possibilities and realities, but instead, it's the trickster spirits or entities that intentionally or sometimes unintentionally create evolution and other realities, other possibilities, even other peoples of the world that end up existing due to the new conditions that were not originally part of the plan of deities. So, those familiar with Loki of the Norse mythology, of course, and obviously other trickster spirits and entities, can better understand the actions, the amoral and antisocial actions that motivates such trickster mythological characters, and the new realities and possibilities that are created from their actions. So it's curious to notice when Loki of the Norse myths does something, it's totally unexpected, even for Loki itself. And among the chaos and disaster, something new is created that ends up becoming very useful, but at the cost of something else. New possibilities are created beyond the intentions and the imagination of the gods, beyond the plans, the original plans of the divine. Trickster entities are capable of destruction, creation, evolution, disaster, catastrophe, new possibilities, and new realities. In animistic societies, they are responsible for evolution because they transgress the boundaries of order. Therefore, nothing will be stagnated, but always changing to give way to new possibilities, new realities, and even new lives. In this way, trickster spirits or entities in animistic societies and in an animistic worldview, of course, refuse to limit themselves to the authority of high gods or ultimate powers or orderly creators. Tricksters are not gods, but are equally powerful and belong to a specific category that distances themselves from deities. So again, not entities the human persons would want to venerate or invite or call upon or even celebrate due to their very unpredictable and chaotic nature, but recognized as powerful and as necessary nonetheless, therefore worthy of respect, as such included in the broader category of more than human persons, to whom a display of respect is necessary from time to time. Trickster entities are by far the most popular of all the entities in animistic societies, perhaps second only to the ancestors, which is why trickster characters remain longer in folk traditions and mythologies. And now we understand why Loki in the Norse myths appears as often and sometimes even more than the gods themselves. One of the most worshipped gods, if not the most worshipped god in pre-Christian Scandinavia, was the god Thor. And Odin, on the other hand, is the one most written about, not because he was highly venerated or adored, but because Odin was most worshipped by nobles and kings, by a tiny fraction of the population, by the elite. And for this very reason was the main deity in Scandinavian literature. We have the impression that Odin was the most worshipped of all the gods because he was precisely worshipped by the elite, by the nobility, therefore the ones who held more power and more resources and with access to education, and being the wealthy patrons of those who could read and write, therefore they paid to have it written the things they were more focused on and cared about. But even so, Loki is the one that appears most often, not because he was worshipped, because he wasn't even considered a god, but because he was the trickster spirit, which in animistic understandings, trickster spirits are the ones that challenge transcendence and insist that everyone, absolutely everyone, is involved in the evolution of life. Trickster spirits transgress the boundaries of deities, and in this way, they represent the transgressions of social and political boundaries as well. The political and social boundaries the communities of human persons also create. So, in terms of pre-Christian Scandinavian historical reality of the past, obviously, outside the elite panorama, outside the centers of power, which was where people worshipped other gods and in fact cared little about Odin and had their own magical religious activities and several cultural syncretisms. Odin was by no means the main god. We only get that impression because he was the most written about, and that's it, and that's all. Precisely for being the god of the elite, and for those who knew how to read and write, the skalds, poets, often performing at court and being paid by their wealthy patrons, and therefore they would, of course, often praise precisely the reality of their wealthy patrons, and not of the common folk. So Loki would have been the most popular entity among the common people, the trickster spirit and not the god. The most popular god among the common folk would be, of course, Thor. But Loki, being the amoral trickster spirit, the powerful entity capable of transgressing the norms, rules, laws, and order of the gods, was far more popular and remained longer in folk tradition and, of course, by extent, in mythology. And to this day, in many Scandinavian countries, Loki still marks a strong presence in folklore and folk tales and folk traditions, as I have presented on the previous video concerning Loki. thus becoming a sort of folk hero, very popular, as all trickster spirits are. They represent the freedom from the orderly boundaries created by the deities, and they break such boundaries, forcing everyone to be part of and included in the evolution of life, because trickster entities themselves and their own nature is a refusal to the acceptance of limits. Tricksters demonstrate free will by challenging communal virtues and the tendency of establishing the necessary ritual, religion, politics, and other modes of constraining life. They are beyond all of that. Their nature is beyond restriction. Tricksters are unique and constantly challenge limitations. They are transcendental to every limitation and boundary and order that is imagined or intended. As such, and as I've previously said, tricksters create new possibilities out of every imagined plan by the deities. And this is the process of making the world a little more habitable for every life, without having to be solely restricted to some lives in some realities. Tricksters open up the entire world to include all life and make that life, as a whole, part of the evolution of life. Tricksters are beyond religion or any notion that creates clear boundaries, be that socially speaking or, of course, psychologically speaking. All the stories of trickster spirits or entities are essential to motivate and encourage creativity that expands beyond the limits set within the various social, political, and religious realities of a tradition. So, trickster entities, in all their essence and power, are far more creative than they are destructive. Tricksters encourage people not to bow down to fate or bow down to imposed boundaries or bow down to authorities that prevent evolution. Tricksters encourage people to find other means, more creative means and alternatives, and alternative means of survival and overcoming the obstacles of fate. Right, my dear friends, I hope you have enjoyed yet another video. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video. And as always, thanks for today. Tack för idag.